Mercer. I am super, super stoked to exchange energy with you in a very kind of, well, I was going to say literal. I don't know if it's literal, but in a very direct way. I am super stoked. Welcome to the show.
I love it. It's probably literal. We just can't measure it yet. I've got to believe.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll see the connection between all things. But yes, let's do this.
Yes. Awesome. All right. So we are going to be talking about that giant can of worms, which is data and analytics and Google Analytics and KPIs. I love this stuff. I feel super overwhelmed by it at the same time. I am not going to lie. But before we get too deep into me picking your brain on numbers for normal people, I'd love to know first, what is your personal superpower?
Systems.
Systems.
You know what it is? Here's what I think about.
Got along for a reason.
Whenever I think about this question, it's like, you know the kid in The Sixth Sense where it's like, I see dead people. It's like, that's what I think about, except I'm the kid going like, I see systems everywhere. And that is my superpower. I can see a system that produces results and know that, we can't really tweak the results too much, but we can absolutely affect the system and then get the result that we're looking for. So systems, 100%.
After my own heart. I tell people I think in hierarchies, and I just recently realized they have no idea what that means because most people don't.
And yet there's a part of me that was like, that's awesome structure.
Right, that's my people, yes. Structure, yeah. All right, so I know the answer to this already, but why does the world need what you do? Why is it so critical?
Measurement is important because I think, and this is how I really honestly think about it. When you're in an offline world, if you have a brick and mortar store, you have a shoe store, you have people walking into your store, you will naturally ask them, how can I help you? Okay, let me help you over here. Give them the thing. Let's try this on. And you go through all these natural conversational points. For some reason, when the world flipped to digital, everybody forgot the conversation. It's still happening, only now it happens between a user and your web page. Not even your website. Each individual page of that site is having a conversation with your user. And what people sort of didn't realize was possible is that you can actually listen for that conversation. That's what measurement is all about. It allows us to listen to their side of the conversation, and then we adjust the marketing to keep the conversation going in the way that we want it to go. And that's why measurement marketing really exists for us, is we listen to the conversation. Are we having that conversation we think we're having with our users? And if not, we can adjust it. And measurement allows us to access that.
Awesome. That was a beautiful and succinct answer. And it really just went right into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the relationship between data and story. Because I love how you framed this. I perceive that there is a gap, but it exists more in people's minds than in reality, where, people consider themselves to either be like left-brained or right-brained or creative or data-driven. And
or
what I'm hearing,
person or not a numbers person.
Exactly. I literally 100%. Have that wording written down here because I have a team of people who don't consider themselves to be numbers people. Even, my CMO, who is a funnel expert who looks at all the numbers and does all this stuff, but they still don't consider themselves to be a numbers expert because they perceive themselves first and foremost to be a story expert and content strategy expert. And they see those things. I don't know if it's so like conscious or direct. It's just something that comes up a lot. So what I'm hearing from you is that as technology has advanced, data and analytics has become a new way to gather those stories or to gather the root of those stories now that we're not directly interacting with people every day who are coming through our location. Is that, just want to check in on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because it used to be back in the day, you would have a little, when somebody walked through the store, you could have a clicker or there's a little beam of light that they would cross and touch. How many people come into your store, and then you can see how many transactions you had. Now you can figure out your conversion rate on foot traffic. And that's what analytics allows us to do, but in the online world. It's 100% right.
Magical. It's magical. All right. So with that context in mind, though, let's talk about someone who is coming from that more quote unquote creative world. And I use finger quotes because, again, I think data involves a lot of creativity to really leverage it properly, but that's not the perception. Just to give you an example. So at Anansi, back in the day, we had literal conversations with, we still do this now, but we didn't measure any data, but we just had literal conversations with people. We'd be working with someone to put together a content strategy. We'd be like, okay, who are your clients? Who are your customers? We would just have a few conversations. How is that similar or different to the way that people interact with a web page and data is gathered from that? Like, how have we moved? Just break it down for me. Someone who has gone from literal stories that they're collecting and parsing data from that to pulling the story from the data, which is what I'm hearing is happening now.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So the way to think about this, and I think where sometimes it goes wrong even a little bit, is the focus is on the result too much. Because it's so easy to get the result, we only focus on the result. We focus on the number of leads, or we focus on the number of sales and how much money was reported, and that's pretty much it. And then immediately we go back and say, okay, well, how did Facebook do to causing that, or how did email do to causing that? And that is always the result.
Yeah.
And that final result is really just the final sale. And that's how we think about it. But there's a lot of other sales that had to have happened before that magic one of where we exchange credit cards information.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
needed
absolutely.
to be the awareness of the brand sale. There needed to be the interest in the product or service sale. There needed to be the sale where I showed that I investigated your product or service and actually thought about it. Then there needs to be the sale where I actually take the click, right? Whatever that initiation action is, where I take that. And then I get to the cart page, and that process starts all over again. There needs to be okay, I'm going to interact. I'm going to figure out I'm on the right place. I'm going to actually start interacting with the fields and complete the thing and, do all that process. So because we got so good so quickly at measuring results, there was a disconnect because the result was here. There was a whole lot of other time that passed, right, between the result and that traffic that maybe initially caused the result. And there's a lot lost in the connection there. It's just hard to be able to say, well, how much did Facebook create or how much did email create? Because there's a million other traffic sources that were involved in the conversation. So no wonder it's so hard. It's pretty practically impossible to figure that stuff out. So the answer is not just measuring for result, but you measure, to your point, for story. So now it's what was awareness? How we measure awareness? Like for us, we might say it's when they land on a certain page, they're aware of a certain product. Then when they see the cart page, they've now engaged in the journey with that product. When they see the thank you page, they've now completed the journey with that product or service that we're talking about. Yeah. So we can measure for the story. And what you start to see, because it's actually a lot easier to figure out kind of what your sort of sub steps are, your results are. You'll see that Facebook might be amazing at creating awareness, but Google Ads is really what creates the engagement. And then your email, when they become a lead, email is what really closes the deal. And you start to understand your traffic sources, what they're very good at naturally doing in terms of creating a result in your own personal story, and how you can start using them together to piece them together. Okay. You only see that stuff when you can measure for it.
When you measure and dig in. Okay, so let me just unpack this and reflect it back at you and see if I'm understanding all the pieces here, because I can see the systems brain and how you're breaking this down. It's just really great. So what I'm hearing is that, and quite frankly, I see this even with people who are more experienced marketers, is that, even when they're looking at a funnel, looking at all the different pieces and stuff, they're looking at that end result. So I'm hearing that the first thing to do is start with kind of the story, which is tied to that end result of what you're hoping for them to achieve, but then break it down into the different pieces and make sure that you're looking at each of those different pieces. And of course, correct me here if I'm off. And as you're looking at the different pieces, it's not just about, optimizing each of these different pieces. It's about defining what success looks like at each of those different stages so that it's consistent, and then understanding how the different third-party systems fit into that naturally is what I'm hearing. Because we have we have so many different, I have another question about this, but we have so many different kind of tools available to us that drive traffic, that measure data, that do all this different stuff. I'm hearing that it's not that there's one magical way that you kind of line them all up. It's about getting a feel for, over time, the pieces of story that are associated with those broken down elements and broken down tools. Is that?
That's exactly right. So the phrase to remember is results and how. You have to know what your results are. You have to know how you're getting those results. When you know those two things, you've got a map, right? Where you can say, okay, well, based upon how I achieve results, here's how I can achieve results next week in the same sort of method. You start to understand, I'll give you another phrase, the truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern. And this is how the people who are not numbers people, they can start interacting with numbers a little bit. Because it's not really the number. I don't really care about a specific number. What I care about is the pattern. Right? What I care about is the trend of numbers. What I care about is, of 100 people that see my page, I know 10 to 15 are going to go to the cart page. Of the 10 to 15 that go to the cart page, I know roughly half of them are going to complete. I know what my average order is going to be, and therefore I can predict revenue because I know my results, right? The revenue I'm getting, and I know how I'm getting those results. And all it is I don't look at, yes, it's reflected as a number. There's no way around that, right? It's going to be a number. However, What I'm really looking at is 100 people. I'm seeing people land on a page. I'm seeing people interact with a card. I'm seeing people make a purchase. I'm seeing the behaviors. And the numbers are just telling me sort of how those behaviors are coming through and what the drop off is at each step. But I'm just seeing behaviors. And I think that's the biggest difference between kind of a self-described numbers person and somebody who's not a numbers person. Is a numbers person looks at a number and they realize they're just looking at behaviors, numbers representing a certain behavior, right? That's all it is. People who are not numbers people see the number and stop. And they go, it's a number. I'm not sure what it means, but it's always just a representation of a behavior. And when you follow it through that, you realize, oh, it's just visualize that. Oh, 100 people going to the page and then click into the cart and then purchasing. Now you look at your numbers and go, oh, there's a story there that and they're telling me my results and how I'm getting my results.
Yes, this makes a lot of sense to me. Now, the two blocks that I see come up again and again are around overwhelm, essentially. One is the actual systems themselves. Like there's too many options, it's too complicated within it. You know, I just need to know these 4 numbers and there's 8 million numbers, which is kind of the other block I see is people either do not know which key numbers to track or they track too many numbers. Like what I see is either, you know, people who are tracking like just a few key kind of critical numbers that may not tell the whole story because they feel overwhelmed at the thought of having to go out and find those other numbers, or people who build these giant dashboards, not people who, but situations where someone has built this giant dashboard, but they don't necessarily understand kind of where to go there. And I'd love to start with the system, the tech systems themselves, because that seems to be the first barrier for non-numbers people. So I'd love to know, is Google Analytics still like the king? I know there are infinite basic like data parsing services or dashboards or custom that you can create, etc. Where should someone who is feeling totally overwhelmed start?
So let's start with Google Analytics because it is the one that's been around the longest. It is the one that probably will be around the longest. And it's completely free, which means it's accessible for everybody, right? Everybody watching and listening to this has access to analytics. So we can all start there. Yeah. The secret, the reason why analytics typically leads to overwhelm is because probably what's happened, and I know it happened for me, maybe it happened for you when you first started, but for sure it did for me. I thought setting up Google Analytics meant what Google told me, which is take the code on the page, put it on your site. And then all of a sudden these reports light up. So it's like, okay, now I'm going to go find my insights, my magical insights, like unicorns in a forest. I'm going to go find these magical insights and I'm going to be a supermarketer. But what happens is you get back there, you see stuff, kind of makes sense, but not really. Then you look at other reports which seem to say the opposite thing. And then you're like, I clearly don't know what any of this means. I'll come back in a couple of years. Like that's what most people have experienced with Google Analytics. Yeah. So the secret is they actually requires a little bit of setup, not much, but a little bit. You have to be able to set it up. And that's where I think when this whole thing first started hitting the mainstream from a marketing perspective, the message really wasn't out there that you had to set it up. They just turned it on by putting on code or turning on some integration, and then they started using it. But it was never set up to properly tell a story. And that means tagging your traffic in a certain way so you can see if an email that was the third email in an autoresponder series caused a result. You can absolutely do that with Google Analytics, but you have to give it a little bit of help. You have to set it up. And the way you set up your goals, the results that you're trying to measure for in terms of awareness goals, and did they complete the journey goals, and did they engage along the way goals, and having that sort of story, then you can instantly see traffic and how that traffic is actually causing the customer journey moving through. Okay. Google Analytics really does want to tell you a story. Now, I'll give you another way to think about it is if I gave you a children's book and I asked you to read the children's book to me, you could probably do that without any real problem, right? But if I take that book, I rip the pages out, and I rip them in tiny little bits, and I give you a handful of broken pages back. Can you read me the story?
That's really resonant.
The answer is yes. You can totally read me the story because I didn't change your ability to read. But it's a lot harder to figure out.
It's a lot more complicated. Yeah.
And that's why when you set up Google Analytics with just a little bit of help, if I just pasted those pages back together, all of a sudden there'd be an instant story there for you to read. That's what Google Analytics is. Just people don't realize that they have to do that.
Okay, so this makes a lot of sense. And again, I have like 2 more branching questions off here. So one is, I've heard that, and we have had issues with this in the past, that setting up Google Analytics, there are, the tags and the goals and et cetera, but there's also a problem with like bot traffic and kind of understanding these sorts of pieces. So is the setup you're describing, I guess first question is that a myth or something that has been addressed, or is it still a problem? I know I'm aware of it being a problem for us about a year ago. I'm not sure where we're at now. And is the setup that you're talking about that's a little bit more in depth, is that a way of getting around that? Or is that kind of a totally separate issue?
So yes, there are times where bot traffic can affect your numbers. 100%. It will happen. Google's very, very good at getting rid of that, at finding that there's a little bot filter. You actually have to turn it on. You have a little bot filter, you have to turn it on. But if you turn on that bot filter, then it can pull that stuff out. So yes, that does exist. It will happen again, but it's occasional blips, and it doesn't affect the trend. Right?
Okay.
It doesn't affect your trends, which is good. So you get this occasional spike, you go, oh, it's an outlier, right? And so you don't get too freaked out about it. It doesn't necessarily destroy the usefulness of Google Analytics with the occasional spikes. That said, as a setup step, there are something called views in Google Analytics, and you can create a view where you filter out only the stuff that's like, maybe you filter out your internal team traffic. You can do your best to filter out spam bot traffic, which you can set up things to do that and filter those things out, so that when you're looking at what we call the production view, you're only looking at the view that's there to give you answers you need so you can go take the actions that you want to take. Right? Because I'm as much as I am a numbers person, I don't want to stare at numbers all day. I have things to do. I need to go change marketing, right? I don't want to look and analyze a report. So whenever we build dashboards, we build them so they are designed to give us action as fast as possible. That's part of the reason. That's part of the way you can do that.
Okay. So this is all making a lot of sense, and I appreciate that clarity there. Now, for this setup piece, like I'm someone who considers myself actually right in the middle of a numbers person or not numbers person, but I know that that kind of setup piece can be intimidating for people. So I'm not 100% sure how to word this properly, but I'm just going to throw it out there. We're going to see how it goes. All right. So how important is it to have someone as part of your team or immediate network who is an expert in doing these kinds of things, versus how important is it for the person who is interpreting and applying the data and information to have those skills themselves around setting it up? Does that make sense? Like, how specialized of a setup is it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So speaking overall as measurement, you're asking sort of two ends of measurement. It's the setup of the measurement, and it's the reading the data of the measurement.
Yes.
I think you need to have both in that house. Measurement's no longer a project. It used to be thought of like, oh, I'm just going to I'll build up my funnel and then I'll set up measurement. You really can't do that anymore. Measurement needs to be kind of brought up to the front and say, we're planning out our funnel. How will we know if it's doing the right thing, right? To your point, the definition of good. How will we know if the steps are working like they're supposed to? It's because we're going to measure them. How will we measure them? And it's all part of the planning process now. The reason that it's important to have both sides, we have the setup and the people looking at the data, because if they just look at the data, and this is the problem, especially with very large organizations, because they get siloed, right?
Yes.
Smaller companies, it's easier to have that skill overlap. But in large companies, you have the data analyst on the one side, and you've got the creative marketer on the other side. And the creative marketer asks the data person for a bunch of numbers, which they give them. And the data person goes, great, I don't know what to do with that. I'm not gonna do what I'm gonna do anyway. And they just never really get along. So the measurement marketer is that person in the middle, where to look at the data and to understand that what you're looking at may or may not be the exact truth, right? May or may not be accurate. It has to be something useful. How do we know if it's useful? You can look at the setup and make sure how the numbers are getting there. So you know that what you're looking at is something that's useful, right? What we call the useful truth. Something you can actually take some action on. If you're just doing the setup and you're never using it, how do you know if your setups are being used? Are they useful? Right? So that's why you do both. And it doesn't actually take that much to learn it. It's just a matter of a framework to follow. And when you have a simple
favorite,
that's exactly right. When you have a framework to follow, it puts the steps in order and context, it does become as simple as sort of setting up a kid's storybook. It's new, right? And it doesn't mean it's hard, but it will be new, because for a lot of people, they've just never done this before. But if you follow a series of steps, right, and get little guidance along the way, you can get surprising useful truthfulness out of your Google Analytics.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense to me, because I know one of the reasons I ask this question is because I hear a lot that people feel a lot of challenge. Leaders have a lot of challenge in terms of not just growing their team, but figuring out kind of who should sit in what seat and et cetera. And I know for us on the content side, our process in terms of the deliverables and the pieces hasn't changed much in years. But initially it started out with, one person doing the interview and, having another person do kind of like the strategy and writing writing and they would look over it and etc. And ultimately what we decided is that it was harder to find more of those kind of unicorn people who could lead a project and do the writing and lead a good interview and do that stuff. But having it just be simplified in that way was so much more valuable. And I'm hearing a lot of similarities in what you're saying, which is that while some people may have kind of more of that technical expertise than others, because the system is part of understanding how you're going to set up and measure and which goals you're going to pick and etc., basically having those roles siloed has a huge, at worst, I'm hearing an opportunity cost, or sorry, at best an opportunity cost. At worst, it could really throw you kind of off a cliff because it's an iterative process. Like each time you kind of go through it and set it up, you don't need to know the entire back end of the system. You just need to be able to look at what you chose and how it impacted what you did, and then kind of look at the relationship and continue to iterate based on, I mean, it's not just those two, but based on those pieces.
That's exactly right. I'll give you a real world scenario from our company. So I am the owner of the company. So I have to guide the company, make sure that all the products are performing, the categories are performing, the profits are coming in, and that everybody gets their bonuses, right? And then we're taking care of our customers. So I'm sort of making sure that happens. We've got the marketing department whose job it is to generate eyeballs to see the offers and make sure those eyeballs are prepared enough so they're ready to see the offers and then interact with the offers and go to the cart and then ultimately complete the cart. And I've got our measurement side who is there to create the reports so that we can see what's going on. So when we're asking questions, we can kind of see the gears, lift the hood, so to speak, see the gears and see how things are, if they're operating the way we expect them to be operating. Very important thing, by the way. Always ask yourself, is this working like it's supposed to? Not, how are they using my site? That's it's a bad question because it's, how are you going to answer that? But when you say, I believe they're using the site like this, is that true?
Constraints build creativity. Right? Yeah, this, exactly right. I want to immediately go off on a tangent, but I'm not going to interrupt you. Please continue.
So to cap this, so in a real world scenario, I'll look at a certain result and I will go to the marketing director and say, okay, what is your expectation, your projections, your forecast for how much traffic this particular page is going to get? Of those, how many do you expect will go to the cart? Of those, how many do you expect will make it through the cart at what average order value? And so they've got their projections. And they do that by week for the year. Right. So we have that. So we have a goal. So how does he know if he's achieving that or not? That's where the measurement team comes in. And so they'll work with him and say, okay, what exactly are you trying to figure out? Well, I need to figure out how many eyeballs are seeing the page. Well, does it matter how many eyeballs are seeing the page, or does it matter how many people actually see the offer itself and maybe stare at that offer for 4 seconds? Because that is probably more indicative they're actually investigating the offer. And that's really what we're trying to do. And then measure people from that point in the conversation. Do they go to the cart? And then marketing, who maybe didn't know that was possible, works with measurement, who does know that's possible because they have those technical abilities. And they go, yeah, that's exactly the behavior. And measurement even suggests that because they understand marketing a little bit. They understand why marketing is So these two departments come together, and then I just sit there and I'm kind of that conductor who's just orchestrating, making sure that the report is doing what it needs to do, and that we're seeing the number of what we call asks now. So many people, did we actually see that page and ask to investigate the offer? Then how many of those went to the cart? How many of those actually completed? And then I'm just measuring the trends, looking at there, and then asking the questions of if I can see the trends going down, or we're not hitting where we need to hit, I will go to the marketing team. Looks like, here's what I'm seeing. Is that what you're seeing? What actions will we be taking now? Because we role play this all the time. What actions will we take if it's lower? What actions will we take if it's higher? Right? So it's like, then we can role play, make sure those questions are being answered, and then ultimately decide what the next actions are going to be, and then manage against it. So I, as an owner, am just managing the activities, but ultimately what I start doing is handing those, when I teach those systems, they then go off to the departments managing their own activities, which of course produce the symptomatic result. So that's sort of how we interact as different departments.
Okay, I really, really appreciate that breakdown, and I have lots of ideas for my own team, but they're not necessarily relevant to this conversation right now. What is, I think, really relevant is I really appreciate how you have just gotten a little bit more specific and clearer about your relationship as a leader and owner, because I know that this is something a lot of people are working towards, is being able to kind of step back and have other people run those systems. And I know that as someone who has successfully achieved that step back, it's more like a pendulum swing of being pulled back in and out and in and out rather than kind of exiting and not coming back.
Definitely not a switch that's turned off. You're absolutely right.
No, not at all. So I would love to hear details of that framework for setting it up if we have after we tackle this thing. But before that, I just want to I guess, get an understanding for how much time, like as a leader, so we've heard about how the different departments interact with each other. So as a leader, are you, looking at a report or a scorecard or something every week and choosing to step in once every 2 or 3 weeks if there's an issue? Are you having a sit down meeting that's like an hour or two every month? Like, what does that look like for you in terms of your involvement with those teams?
So I will go through and look at my company's numbers. So the way that we have it, it's a primarily a spreadsheet because I'm just comfortable with that format. So I have a spreadsheet that has our total revenue, what our likely projected revenue for that week is for that period of time, right? In our case, weeks. So week for the revenue, here's what my likely was, here's what my potential was. If everything worked perfectly, where did we actually show up? And then I break it down by category. So like done do-it-yourself level products, the done with you products, the done for you products, maybe other brands we have, and by product within those categories. So then I can see all of that. And we have projections, right? Forecasts for everything. So I'm comparing against like, here's what should have happened. Did it happen? So that whole thing is, as much as that sounds like it is, really takes me about 30 minutes to update. So in a 30-minute period, I've got this updated map now that describes for me what my near future looks like. And I can look out, and what we are now at is looking at, instead of working on today or this week or this month, because when we walk into the month, we've got a saying, like, you walk into the month's already done. March was over when we walked into March. We started working on April and May. And now that we're, as of this recording, right toward the end of March in 2021, we are already working on May and June. That's what I'm really looking forward to, right? So when I look at the numbers, that's what I'm looking at, is based on what's happened now up until this point, because I will adjust the forecast occasionally if I start to see trends or different things, like, I don't know, a pandemic pops up out of nowhere, like things like that can affect business. Right? So you adjust. Just a little bit. 100%. So you make some adjustments, and then you're looking out 3 months ahead saying, okay, is that where I want to be? Is that the likely revenue that I want? If so, I just need to make sure the plan is executed properly. That's there. If not, which sometimes the answer is it's not. This is where our weekly team calls come together with our leadership team. And we got all the heads of the departments to come together, and we look at the numbers and we're like, listen, this is where we are in 90 days. Is anybody like that? No. What are we going to do now to make it up? What are some ideas? What are some things we can do to make sure that in 90 days, this number is not there, but it's substantially higher? And then we talk about what are the activities that we can do. And then we'll reflect those activities, which then tell us, of course, what the results are. And we go, okay, does that look better? Yeah, it does. Cool. Now we've got a plan. That's what we execute on. So that's how we use numbers to guide that entire process.
Yeah. So this is making a lot of sense to me. What I'm hearing is that you're only taking kind of a minimum of time as your consistent habit of checking the numbers, and how you are filtering your look at those numbers to make it different. So you're not just doing other people's jobs for them, or, just totally divesting yourself of it and then finding yourself in a bad situation. You are kind of in that crow's nest. You are looking months ahead, they're tackling the day-to-day, et cetera. You, from being removed, it sounds like, from the day-to-day, can look at more of those industry trends, can look at those longer-term numbers. Where are we going? What's the next thing? And be consistently bringing that in with enough time and leeway that you can address a potential future issue before it kind of comes home to roost. Now, what you haven't said, but what I'm hearing is kind of the underpinnings of this, is that you probably had to do some level of, iteration, understanding what that baseline is to be able to move further ahead in that way. Am I interpreting that correctly? Like, you can't just, I'm going to start looking 90 days ahead, etc. It sounds like for you to be able to know what those projections are and basically predict what things are going to be, I'm curious whether you just started putting things out there based on what you knew and basically like iterating and improving as experience taught you better, or did you have a different system to kind of get it set up and working and then shift towards more of that, okay, I'm going to look at those projections and assess?
It's a really good question. So whenever I build a system, I do not plan for it to succeed. I plan for it to fail. Right?
A lot. Yeah.
And by fail,
on the path,
all I really mean, success or failure, to be honest, they're kind of this weird sort of like, either way, it doesn't matter to me. They're both feedback. That's all I care about. So I build a system with feedback. And this is the toughest part about forecasting when we teach this, is that there's this innate desire to be right. And people want to be like, well, I don't know what next week's going to look like. I'm like, I don't care that you don't know, just guess. Because the system will tell you what the actual
will correct you. Yeah.
And you will find I was way off. So if you're way off, what does that mean for the next week? Well, you might adjust that a little bit. And then you get better and you get better. And again, the beautiful part about numbers, my favorite part about numbers, is the truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern. You will start to see a trend. This is how I know that 8 to 12% of our audience will and has for the last 3 years go from offer to cart. For our types of pages, certain types of pages, 8 to 12% will go. I know that 40 to 45% will make it through cart and go. And I know what my average ticket's going to be for both monthly buyers and for annual buyers. I know this because we've had a 3-year trend of this. Does it mean it's going to be like that in 5 years? Probably not. But when the actuals start to change, I'll notice it and I'll adjust my forecast accordingly. Right. And so it's not about being right, but it is about thinking market forward, right? Marketing forward.
Yes.
We're always looking forward, saying, this is how this is supposed to work. Did it? So what if you don't hit what you wanted to hit? That's okay. You get feedback, and feedback is amazing, right?
Yes.
You can do great things with feedback. And so we will take our feedback and then we put it into the system. We feed the system, which is expecting feedback, right? It needs feedback to make it better. And that's how you do that. So you can project out for an entire year, which I do. I will project out for an entire year. And then as the actuals come in, I will start adjusting out the next 13 weeks based on what's been happening. Right. And if I see big, giant things changing, then okay. Like for instance, in COVID last year is a perfect example.
Yeah.
We had a product that we do for companies called private guided training. Well, that really was me going up on stages, which we used to be able to do back in the day. So I would speak at live events all the time. And when I came off stage, I'm having conversations at different conferences and meeting with teams and meeting with owners who are not going to be in the training themselves, but want their companies trained. So we help them with this measurement marketing culture with private guided training. That particular product, I did not realize how absolutely connected it was to live events for a lead source. Right? So all of a sudden, this high-end product that we had went away. So we saw COVID come in, live events go away, that whole funnel drops down to nothing. I've got two choices. One is, okay, we got to figure out a digital way to sell this because we've never done it before, or we have to figure out another way to make up for this revenue. Right. Which is what we ended up doing because it was the easier thing for us to do. We're like, oh, we can just do this. We can create this other product in digital. We can pull this one up. We were going to do 6 months out. Let's do that one now instead. And that was the conversation that we had so that we hit our revenue goals. So my initial forecast was not at all. I didn't get there the way I thought I was going to get there in January. But by December, I had arrived. Right?
Yeah, and you had the constraints to be able to assess where you needed to pivot so that you're not just like randomly changing. Yes,
exactly.
yes.
Feedback fed the system. That's exactly. Feedback fed the direction I wanted to go. Absolutely right.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is that it's way more important to pick a direction, start moving in that direction, start tracking, and establish a regular cycle of observing and adjusting. I know I had a mentor who called them OODA loops, so that you can leverage those opportunities in time with that feedback.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Build your systems to need feedback. You're not going to be perfect. How many times have you created a plan and immediately goes off the rails, right? We all know that.
Yes.
So I stopped trying to fight that. I'm like, that's what's going to happen. So I'm going to put my best intention out there and immediately and often, and this is the key, immediate and often look for feedback, chances to get feedback so I can make the system better as I go, because I know it's not going to be perfect. Nowhere near that. But with consistent feedback, it does surprisingly become really, really useful. And you can start predicting out with greater certainty. Here's where I'll be in 90 days. Here's where I'll be in 120 days. Here's where our end revenue at the end of the year is going to be. And you can know that a year out when you get used to this sort of system, you start to understand how it all works.
Yes, this is honestly so freaking cool because this makes perfect sense. This is basically how I would build, and it's the system for building systems, right? And this is the system for systems that I've used to make our operational process just so freaking dialed in to the point where we have even adopted it as a company value. Fail fast, adapt well is what we've titled it for that exact same thing, right? You're gonna fail. It's not an if, it's a when. And if you account for that and look at the advantages you can get from those failures and what data you can feed back into the system, then actually it's in your best interest to fail as fast as possible rather than wait to have something you think is perfect that is still going to have and need that same feedback loop in order to be improved. And so what I find really, really amazing about this is that you've just given me those little details, I think, that I needed to apply this same thing to our marketing systems. And I think that that's really, really cool. And now my brain is just like fireworks going in all these different directions. All right, but I'm going to let my brain do its fireworks. And I'm going to ask you something unrelated or related, but not specific to this. So I want to go back. So I love your system for building systems. You talked about that you had a system for when you set up Google Analytics that was fairly simple for someone to follow, that was just basically a framework that could make sure that they're getting all the right things. Now, would you be willing to share that framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way to think about it is really sort of five key steps that we'll go through in our trainings. So the first starts with planning. This is the thing that most people skip, but it's where you think about, here are the questions I want to answer. What information, this is what we call the KIA process, QIA. So questions I want to answer, the information that I will need to be able to collect to get those answers. And then this is the most important one to answer. What actions will I take based upon the answers I get? And you do all that before you even start opening Google Analytics or Tag Manager or anything like that. So as an example, the question, I need to know how many my opt-in rate is. And I want to be able to break it down by traffic source. Okay, what information will I need? I will need to know if it came from Facebook or some other traffic source. I'll have to tag it properly. I'll need to know the number of people on my offer page. I'll need to know the number of people who hit the opt-in thank you page. Okay, now I can figure out my conversion rates. So now I can get those answers. What actions will I take? Well, if it's less than 25% with Facebook, then I'm going to start looking at the audience targeting or maybe work on the offer itself because it's a little lower than it should be. If it's higher than 35 to 40% on Facebook, then maybe I'm going to look at the audience because it's not scaling because that's closer to warm traffic. But if it's a warm traffic affiliate, it better be higher than 45 to 55% because that's how this should convert. All of that thinking and role playing and actions. If you think about just personal development, you take your goals, you role play them, you practice them, you visualize them. That's what you're doing in this planning stage. So once you have that worked out, then you go and you actually do your builds. That's where you make sure that if you're using Tag Manager, you can set it up to measure pages, or Google Analytics to make sure the pages are measuring and you've got the information that you need. Then, so you've got the planning stage, you got the build out. We actually are at that point collecting the information and storing it. Then it's reports, right? Reports could be reports in Google Analytics, but a lot of times we like using a platform called Data Studio. Google Data Studio, completely free. It is made to give you dashboards. What I love about Data Studio is it is focused. It will tell you exactly what you want to see, and that's it. It doesn't confuse you and overwhelm you with a million other things that you don't really care about, right?
We've been working with Data Studio just the last few months, and it's a game changer.
Love it. So in Data Studio, we build our essentially kind of like a little funnel. We'll have a little stair step, right? Like a little Candyland chart that says, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, with the conversion rates of all the steps. So we understand what our end result is, and we know how we're getting those results. So we see how the machinery is working. So that Data Studio report, and it's formatted so that certain steps will light up red, yellow, or green if we have to pay attention to them, right? So we know instantly just by looking at it what actions we need to take because we planned for those actions. Right. So in the reporting stage, you're getting the answers that you to the questions in the planning stage, and it all starts tying together. So just those 3 steps will help you. So then what we do is we take it just a step further to really unlock the power of measurement. And it goes back to what you and I were talking about earlier, which is when you know your benchmarks, when you know your results are, and you know how you're getting your results, you can then start to predict your near future and start saying, well, if that's how last week was, that's probably kind of how next week's going to be. And you can start to predict how you're going to get the results next week. So now you start going, well, we're going to have 1,000 people come in from Facebook. Of those, 35% to 40% are going to opt in. Of those, half of them are going to close with email at this average order value to create this result. Then you just measure against it, right? So now you've got your forecast and you're measuring against it. And that brings us to the final step. So we've got planning, building, reporting, and forecasting. The final step is the one that everybody tries to get to first, which is optimizing. They all want to improve things right away. They haven't built the foundation to do it.
It's too real.
So when you measure against your forecasts, right, and you actually see what your actual results are, it would be blindingly obvious where you're making it work and where it's not. And then you go, oh, this is the part that's broken. Let's go focus on why the expectation's not being met there. What's happening with that part of the conversation? But now you go in with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer like most people are trying to do with their funnels. They go in very fine point, go, oh, this is a little piece. We need to adjust this piece. And if we got it right in 2 days, that number is going to look like this instead of that. And that's how you kind of go through the same process again. So those are the 5 steps. It's really planning, do all that, questions you're trying to answer, the information you need, the actions you're going to take based upon the answers you get. Then you do the build out where it's like Tag Manager and Analytics. Then you do the reports, maybe something like Data Studio, seeing your dashboards. Then you do forecasts, and then you measure against your forecast. That's what will tell you where to optimize.
This makes so much freaking sense for me because I'm just going to be totally candid here, which is that when I first got into the content strategy and the web agency industry and all this kind of stuff, I thought this would be what I would be doing every single freaking day. But the reality was when I entered the playing field, so to speak, that there was such a lack of good content that really we ended up spending 99% of our time just building website copy and messaging anchors, which is that planning piece, but for the content strategy and brand and stuff. And we actually ended up building funnel pieces and looking at this kind of data other than just the kind of initial data without building full funnels for years because that was our niche. And when we came to this place where all of a sudden it was like, okay, we're working on our own inbound and I have experience in all of these different pieces, but putting it all into practice, there was just one little freaking thing that was missing. And, for like a month or two, we're looking at the numbers and looking at the results. And I'm like, I know that there's a piece here that we're missing. And it's a simple piece because I've done these before and they've been successful. And it was that planning piece that you're talking about in the context of that action piece. I love what you're saying because we do something similar for quarterly planning, which is you make some forecasts and projections and et cetera, and set kind of your rock and et cetera. And then as you go, you iterate that every 3 months based on what you're actually seeing and observing. And the critical part of that I always have to hold leaders accountable to is not getting too hung up on that number at the beginning because it's not enough to look at the results at the end. The important part is getting better at making those predictions or hypotheses or whatever about what it's supposed to look like is an intrinsic part of the process. And that's what I'm hearing from you is that people are looking at the optimization stage. Maybe they're looking at all the different pieces of the funnel, but part of it is not just saying, oh, we want to achieve this result, but saying, okay, we are planning to achieve this. And if it looks like, we are going to look at the numbers. And if the numbers look like this, we're going to take this action. If the numbers look like that, we're going to take that action. And doing that before you have the numbers. It's such a simple thing, but it resonates so strongly for me. I think that that's just cannot be overstated.
100%. And I'll tell you another benefit you will get from that is it will keep you from measuring for measuring's sake. So we had a client back in the day who was like, oh, well, there's these things called UTMs in Google Analytics where you can sort of measure where a very specific click is coming from. And they were going to measure to the point where they would know what paragraph an email was, which paragraph in an email was being clicked. And so I said, well, let me ask you a question. In 6 months, when you see this magic report that says, oh, paragraph number 3, that's amazing. What are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
And they all stopped and they're like, well, yeah, I don't know what to do with that because they don't know what paragraph number 3 means. It could be one thing for one email and completely different. It could be that it was a short link or a long. Actually, you know what? They were going to put in a ton of work, typing all this stuff in. That's this thing they would never actually be able to use. So if you do that in the planning stage, it saves you a ton of work.
Yes.
Down to an action.
Yes, that makes so much sense and prevents you from just yelling into the void and overloading yourself with information, both of which I had questions around. All right. Okay. So I am reluctantly going to start to wrap us up because I feel like I could just keep talking about this. This is really wonderful. But I'm curious, we've talked a lot about people who are, familiar with the data, but maybe not leveraging it to best advantage, or maybe they're just starting to get going. But I'm curious, kind of looking at the landscape of both people who are just getting started in this field, but also people who, have been running funnels for years and are used to kind of these different pieces. What is the thing you see the most that is either an easy opportunity being missed, and who knows, maybe it's what we just talked about, or, like a very common like misconception or mistake or something that you see?
Definitely, it's this one of the two pillars. It'll either be planning or forecasting, where they aren't. So a lot of times clients will come to us when everything's burning already down around them. So what will happen is what I call a curse of a good offer. Is they have this great offer. It worked. They gave Facebook $100. Facebook gave them $1,000 back. Then they said, oh, here's $1,000 Facebook. Facebook gave them 1,500 back. They said, here's 1,500. Facebook gave them $5,000 back. They said, here's $5,000. Here's $50,000. Here's $100,000. All of a sudden, Facebook kept the money. And they went, oh, hey, team that I've built, cash flow that I'm burning. And they go, well, okay, what just broke, everybody? We just need to fix that. And everybody looks around and goes, oh, because we were never measuring it. They never knew they knew the result. They never knew how they were getting it. So they don't know what broke because they don't know how it was happening in the first place. It's curse of a good offer. Then they come to us and they wanted to make sure that everything's done in 30 days, which is not going to happen. Measurement's a process, right? It's a series of steps. So when you forecast and your results and how, and in order to effectively do that, you will have to think through actions, right? Which is that planning stage. So if there's one I had to choose, it would be focus on forecasting and starting to ask yourself the results and how. This is how it's supposed to work. So don't ask don't ask a question of your site to say, well, we're trying to figure out how people are using our blog pages or how they're using our content. It's not a great quality question because there's no real way to answer that. But if you said, we expect that 3% of the people that come to blog posts are going to opt in and become leads, is that what's happening? 100% you can easily find that. If it's greater than 3%, or maybe you log all of your blog posts together and you feel, the top 10 that are above 3%, we're going to go see why that might be. Is there something in common? Then we're going to apply it to the bottom 10%. And then we're going to see if that raises actions, right? And you're asking yourself, is this working like it's supposed to? And you can know it's working. There's no gut. There's no opinion. There's no guessing. It's just, it. It's objective. And for me, it's kind of a control thing. I have to admit, that's my downfall. I like control. So I like making sure there's a number going to be there next Wednesday. I just like making that happen. And that's how you can do it. And it's a great feeling of not having to gut out or guess or wonder what to do and just knowing what to do. And it comes down to just no drama, just executing the plan you got in front of you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, for us, the big unblocking moment, which is why I was like, oh my God, you put a process behind it, was looking at it. And, I had been training one of our strategists up to the role and also running the operations role and all this different stuff of overseeing our main funnel. And the story we were initially telling ourselves is we are not getting enough leads out of the end. But when we looked at it and I started to dig into that data, like I said, I knew I was missing a piece and I sat down with a colleague and he walked me through that. He was like, well, what is the data that you are hoping to see and what will it mean if you do? And just asking that question, it was like, well, if we have enough traffic coming to the registration page for our micro trainings and people are converting, then all of a sudden, people are converting. I think the rate we were looking for was 2% was a minimum. And it was like, okay, if we're above 2%, then we're going to put more money into traffic because that will help us see whether it's just a traffic issue. We need more traffic because there's not enough flow coming out the end. And if it's under that number, then we're going to go back and rehash that offer. And it was like the exact same data, the exact same, cyclical process, but asking that question before going in and looking at the data basically immediately unblocked us because it was like, we had been asking the question, is the offer a right fit? Because that was the piece that looked like it was breaking down, but it took, and it actually funny because this is that leader thing where I was looking at it from afar and I was like, wait, stop, let's talk about this. I don't think that's the issue. And I was willing to ask for help, which I'm proud of myself for. But yeah, it was really that beginning piece was the key where it turned out that, okay, now we have clear next steps and we can iterate on that. And then we can see, okay, maybe, that offer isn't a fit or something, but we won't know until we work off of our forecasts that we made for this initial part, essentially, because that's the current block.
That's exactly right. Yep. And I'll give you one other thing to help visualize sort of what you can do with numbers and the direction to go with them is if you think about a dashboard, right? Most people think a dashboard and they might think about tables and charts and trend lines and none of it really makes sense. It's a bunch of information. It's not a story, right? If you look at your car dashboard and if you are driving and you look at your speedometer, you instantly know, you look at the number, you instantly know to hit the gas or hit the brake. Instant. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to analyze it. Yeah. That is your spirit animal when you're developing marketing dashboards. Is you develop those dashboards because you've planned it out, because you thought what you're going to do when that opt-in rate is above or below a certain amount. Then you come into that dashboard, you see your number, and you're not analyzing because the dashboard was built to give you a very specific answer. You go, cool, that's the answer. I'm going to go take these actions now. And you close out your dashboard. You're not dealing with a million numbers all day long. You are focusing on copy or offers or traffic or ads or opening up new channels. And you're doing the business of business, not stuck in numbers all day long. Because you made it with that, just the fact that to your point earlier, just because you interacted with that number, you knew what to do. You didn't think about it. You knew because you had it now. So absolutely.
Yes. Oh, and this answers a lot of my other questions around how do you kind of pick and et cetera, those numbers and build those dashboards and et cetera, because it's all about the meaningful questions. Do you have a meaningful question around it? What value is it going to give you?
Exactly.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So I want to turn, we've done a lot of talking about systems and kind of that high level piece and digging down, and that has been just honestly like a good back scratch for me. I'm like, oh, this is my jam. But I want to turn the focus just as we wrap up towards you as an individual and as a human, because we often think leader to leader, business to business, industry to industry, but we are humans. And I like to remember that. So as a human, when you are finding yourself on the verge of overwhelm or burnout, and you know, there's still lots going on, what is the number one thing that you usually do to bring yourself back?
I will. So, and this is going to sound, it's very patterned. I'm very pattern driven, as you'll hear my answer. But I try to be aware as much as possible as to what's going on. For me, awareness means I have to know the system. So I know I inherently go into a short circuit process. If I hit overwhelm and frustration where I just can't see straight anymore for whatever reason, I know I'm in a bad resourceful state, right? I know for a fact I just executed a system that put it there. I don't know what it is. I'm not even thinking about it. I just know that this is what produced it. So I must break that system somehow. It's not negotiating with it. It's not figuring out. It's just like, okay, I gotta do something radically different. So for me, that might be I'm walking outside and going around and walking around the lake or something like that near our home. And just to get a break of a pattern. It might be that I go and listen to a podcast on a completely different topic. Right? It's something that breaks the pattern because I'm caught up in something. And so I need a little pattern break. And a lot of times for me, it's both, where I'm listening to a podcast while I'm walking outside and some sort of thing just to shake my thought. And because that brief pause is kind of like when you're taking a shower, you have a great idea all of a sudden that came out of nowhere. That's why, because it was a pause that allowed your brain to go like, oh, okay, it'll fix itself. And I think that's probably just a belief without proven, any sort of proven results.
There is actually lots of evidence behind that, but that's another rabbit hole.
So let's not go into it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I believe that it's like, hey, it's going to heal itself. It just needs to. I can't push it. You got to sometimes be like, okay, you'll figure this out, and I just know it's going to, and then it will. I just have to give it space. So I will do some sort of pattern break when I have frustration and overwhelm. So that's absolutely what I will do. And
I love that. I just switched questions kind of that I ask at the end, and I'm so glad that I did, because that's such a valuable answer. And what I'm hearing about creating space is just so resonant, because again, it's a system that can be applied to whatever's going on.
Changes the environment.
Yeah. Okay.
Change the inputs to the system. Yep. Exactly right.
Yes. Yes. I just totally went into a nerd zone where I'm like, yeah, like when you're playing computer solitaire and you hit a dead end, you just need to make one change and it'll switch up the three cards they're giving to you. And
all of a sudden it reveals itself. You're like, how did I not see that before? And so
yes. All right. Okay. So from emergency mode to, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What is the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness when you're not in burnout mode?
So I have two tasks which are vitally important every day. And they're a little ritual and routine that I will do. They are asana tasks that I have. And there's one that's like 7 minutes for success setup in the day. And there's one that's 7 minutes for a celebration at the end of the day. I kind of have a sort of check-in, check-out ritual into my work days. So I have little buffers in, so you don't just like come in and kind of
creating space,
jumping on the treadmill. Right. It's easing in. It's like the on-ramp into the day and the off-ramp. Right. But the most powerful thing that I have in both of those, and this is a little woo, but it works incredibly well, is I don't believe, and I think I learned this from Tony Robbins like forever ago, that negative emotions are way too easy. You trip over negative emotions. There's thousands of people and messages that want you to feel negative and all. That's easy. Positive emotions, not so easy to naturally feel all the time. But if you put a system in place, they can be. So I have what I call the emotional charge, and I will go through for a minute. And it has all these emotions where it's like, I am prosperous because of this. I feel abundance because of this. I am grateful because of this. And I'll talk to myself and go through that stage and step, charging myself up. So I'm walking into the day with this resourceful, positive, not fake positive, because I'm going back. I'm literally training my brain to go, this is why I'm abundant. This is why I'm wealthy. This is why I'm trusted. This is why I'm valuable. This is why I'm curious, right? This is why I'm prosperous. This is why I'm all these things. This is why I'm creative. This is why I can solve problems.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly training my brain to do that, so that's its system. That's what it's being fed coming into the day and going out of the day. because I figured, the subconscious mind probably needs some stuff at night to process on. So, but that coming in and going out helps to maintain the defense, I guess, for lack of a better term, of the defense against overwhelm, because I naturally believe I can solve problems. I'm creative. I can get around this thing. I know I can take this. Like, I don't know the answer, but that's okay. I know I can figure it out. And so I don't get overwhelmed with not knowing the answer because that belief system's already there. And I'm constantly reinforcing that belief system. That is something that I will not ever stop doing as a daily task, that particular part of it, because it is so useful. And I think that the environments that we are in, can, if you don't maintain your own mental abilities, they can be overwhelming, and they can creep in there when you don't know it. And so maintaining that system and that structure has helped me cannot like hundredfold, thousandfold in return on investment, for sure. For just the simple 1 minute exercise, the beginning and the end, that little part of it, 100% worth it.
Well, thank you for sharing. I honestly, I don't think that's very like woo at all. I think that that's very rooted in like
the numbers guy, right? But it's like, but it is, but it is. I think it's important because there's just too many opportunities to feel bad and negative and doubt yourself. And there's times that I do that for sure. But I also take time to not do that and do the opposite of it and practice those skills so they become more of a habit, so that I don't have to be consciously aware of me doing it all the time. And in the beginning, I did it. I was very consciously aware of it. It was like work. But now it's just who I am, that's what I wanted, right? To program so it does it on its own and enhance that system. So yeah, absolutely recommend that to anybody who feels that.
Yeah. I'm gonna see how I can kind of integrate that into my own kind of morning routine, because I've been doing just real candid moment. I've been doing something similar, but specifically around like worthiness. Just like I am already enough. I'm not broken. My business isn't broken. Nothing's broken, because that's that repeating thought that keeps going through whenever something goes wrong. And I came to the same conclusion. I can't tell myself that when I'm like suffering and believe it
in the moment,
if that's the only time I'm telling myself that. So I looked for those things that weren't just empty affirmations, but really resonated for me. Like I have like a song and some word. I'm a very words person. So, like lyrics and words, and I take a few minutes to sit with it. Not every single morning, but holy cow, just in 3 weeks, that has like transformed my day. So I think it's really timely for you to share this. And I'm really grateful, and I hope it gives other people that push. All right. So before, I unleash you upon the audience to let them know where they can find you and throw themselves at your services and stuff. For people who are listening, do you have any last words of wisdom that someone can walk away with right now that you would like them to hear?
I think it's kind of bringing it to this topic of measurement, which does naturally kind of feel outside of what most people's skill set is when you're first starting out, because the whole thing is different. There is a lot to it. It can be complicated. There just is. So it's okay to go, yeah, it is complicated, and I'm going to try it anyway. Just realize that you're on a journey. Like one of the aspects in measurement marketing that we'll teach is you start off in the cave when you don't know, you can't see anything in your market. You don't know what's working. You barely know what your results are. You don't even trust the numbers that you do see. You're kind of wandering around in the dark. So at that point, you learn the tools just good enough to get going, so you can light things up, get a flashlight in your hand and get out of the cave. And that's it. You don't need to do fancy stuff that maybe you've heard us talk about in this podcast. Just light it up and get used to using some of the stuff. Then you get out of the cave, you're in the valley of visibility. You can look around a little bit. You can start asking bigger questions now because you can see more stuff. And so at that point, then you can start doing some of the fancier things. And eventually you get into the hills, and eventually you start going into the summit, and you get better and better and better. So don't worry about talking to somebody in a mastermind who says, oh, you got to know LTV and all this other stuff that they're doing, because maybe they can, because they've evolved their implementation to that level. Just start with where you're at and be okay with that, and just go forward and be open to feedback. And the system itself is what you rely upon. And that system will eventually, probably a lot faster than you think, produce a result where you can actually get some real usefulness out of it.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Beautiful. I am not going to add anything to that. Did you just want to share with the audience where they can find out more about you and measurement marketing and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, if anybody wants to go to the site, it's MeasurementMarketing.io is the name of our company, also the name of our website. So you can go to MeasurementMarketing.io to find more about our products and services. There is a free level of a membership that we have that comes with a lot of tools and a lot of training on kind of the basic stuff, like how to tag your traffic and how to think about the goals and how to measure for awareness and that sort of strategy stuff to
The
help people get
system
started.
stuff, the strategy stuff. Yes.
There's a ton of tools that are in there. So that's in our toolbox membership. So if you just go to measurementmarketing.io/say it, all one word, /say it, it'll take you right to that page. And then people can sign up for a free account and take a look.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I encourage you guys to do that because I have spoken to many people who know stuff about analytics. And I just feel so impressed by your awareness of the high level pieces of how it works and how that applies to any system, not any system, but to multiple different contexts as opposed to just being able to leverage it in context. So yeah, I think that's really incredible. I'm super grateful for you sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us today. And thanks for coming on. This has been great. This has been fun.
It's been a pleasure. My pleasure. I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Say.
Excellent. And as always, so people who are listening to this, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. If you are thinking about the numbers that you have to juggle or otherwise feeling overwhelmed, maybe not having the best day, then I hope that you can maybe find somewhere to just start where you are. Look at what you're doing. Look at if there's a way to kind of iterate it or look at the patterns or just track data for you to look at the patterns in the future. Start where you are. You don't have to think about everything all at once. And with that, take care, guys. Until next time.